exact time, so he has to catch a flight. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening to all those joining from India. Good morning to Sunanda and all those joining from the Americas. And Sid, good morning. Since you are from an undisclosed location right now, but you are based in New York, so good morning to you too. And
Good morning.
yeah, and all those joining from Europe, good evening. Thank you so much for joining in this session today. We are going to be discussing about a topic that has not been debated or talked about much in the mainstream media till date, which is about rape and silence in Kashmir terror. Fortunately, Siddhartha Roy, who works for Zenger News, based at New York, has brought out this wonderful report which talks about the victims of rape and terror from co-religionists in among Kashmir women. Victims are Kashmir women who face this rape and silence because of the atmosphere that prevails in Kashmir today. So I thank him for bringing out this report, which is certainly a great contribution to this conflict that is happening in Kashmir. I'm not going to be talking much about the topic. I'll give the floor to Siddharth to introduce the subject. But before that, I just want to introduce the other two speakers of the day. Aarti Tikku will go after Siddharth and speak. Aarti Tikku is the founder and editor-in-chief of The New Indian, which is a multimedia platform, news platform, and she's based in Delhi. She's a panelist on several television discussions, and she's a well-known figure. I don't really have to introduce her much on these topics. So I'll leave it at that because we don't have much time because Aarti needs to catch a flight. And Sunanda has joined us from Colorado today, but she's based in Texas in the US. She's again a columnist, and she has written very frequently and extensively on Kashmir as a conflict. She's popularly known as the person who highlighted the Kashmir Hindus' persecution in Kashmir, the genocide that happened during a US congressional session. So I welcome her also to all three panelists to the session. Law and Society Alliance is the host of the event. I'll not introduce Law and Society Alliance because most participants already know about the organization. If time permits, probably I'll introduce at the end of the session. Now I'll leave the floor to Siddhartha to introduce the subject on which he has written. 15 minutes, Sid, and then Aarti goes for another 15 minutes. She has to catch a flight. So we'll keep it like that.
Sure. If I'm rambling, just stop me.
Yeah, the time is.
So, great. So thank you for highlighting the story. I really appreciate that you have. To begin with, how do I even introduce the story? I mean, the story is out there. Whatever I've written in my report is the story. But let me take, there are three primary things that I want to lay out. First, to tell you how I came to the story altogether. It was November, sometime end of November last year, that I got a message on my phone. And it was a selfie video of this young woman. And it wasn't a normal video. Like, a young woman would take time to speak into a video and say what she. This woman's video came to me where she hurriedly spoke through the video. And in a hushed tone, it was very evident that she had entered what looked like, a dressing closet or a bedroom or something. And she recorded something frantically in Kashmiri. And then she sent me another message right after. Sorry, she did speak in Hindi, but it was difficult for me to understand because it was heavily accented. And what she kept saying, what really came through was, मेरे साथ नाइंसाफी हुई है, मेरे साथ नाइंसाफी हुई है. And then she took a photo of a handwritten letter in which she gave a little brief of what had happened. And at the end of it, there was a note saying that I've read your reports, the previous reporting you've done, and I think you'll want to cover this story. That's how the story came to me. The story was very simple, that this young was saying that she has been sexually abused, not just once, several times, and she wanted to put this story out and she couldn't. Now, one very obvious thing struck me, One is, the very first thing that struck me is that There's a whole legion of an army of reporters sitting in Kashmir. There's that India has the largest number of TV channels in the world, as far as I'd like to remember. Why did she reach out to me to tell this story? I was even uncertain, to be honest, because we know that stories are planted into the heads and notes of journalists to be put out. I was skeptical even, but then I went. Then I spoke to the person that had come to me through, and I asked the first question I asked is that why did you think I would do this story? Um, and the answer was very simple. The answer was you've reported on Kashmir before, the most sadly the most well-known aspect of it, which was terrorism and so on and so forth. And they said that you've taken an objective approach. We think you will do justice to this. Nobody else wants to touch this story. These were the exact words. Nobody else wants to touch this story. So I did go in. I went into Kashmir sometime in December with a very small little crew. And in the back and forth during the time before when this story came to me and I was speaking to this woman through the contact, she said, "Come here. There are several like me. It's not my story alone." And uh, within 3 days of me reaching Kashmir, of landing in Srinagar, I spoke to over 2 dozen women who came forth and spoke about their story. The stories have little differences, of course. Everybody's individual story has some uh, variations. But the essential common thing was that most of them, between the ages of uh, 9 to 13, had been violated. And it wasn't episodes of one-off incident. It was a case of where these women were repeatedly violated over a period of sometimes spanning 3 years, 4 years, and so on and so forth. And they could never go out and speak about it. They could never go out and put this out anywhere. And that's how I went about gathering these stories. It was uh, uh, that's what the story really is about. That's the first part. Uh, the second aspect that I want to touch upon this story is, the sheer difficulty of actually doing the reporting on ground. There were so many factors to it. The very first one was I was reluctant. I was reluctant. The reason is that doing a story about Kashmir is always very politically rife. There'll be some party there'll be like X number of parties who will be offended by a story, no matter which way you turn it. If you report about this guy, that guy's going to be offended, and so on and so forth. The second thing that made it very difficult was for me to even believe that the story was true. You know why? Because of the simple reason that in all these years of me not being a journalist, just a regular guy who reads news, I had never read a story from this side. I had never read a story about systemic abuse by the Islamists over there. I have read, we all have read, I'm sure, on this forum, reports about how the ISIS has done things to the Yazidi women. We've read about it, it's all out there. But I had never read a story about Kashmir this way. The politics of it was very difficult to approach. Uh, I mean, I myself have come across women in Kashmir who have very vocally supported the cause of the Islamists, who have said that we want to be mothers and wives of existing mujahideen and mothers to future mujahideen. How was I to believe when approaching this story that here was a genuine case of where there was a whole bunch of women saying, no, we've been wronged? It was my own skepticism. That was the second difficulty approaching this. The third one, of course, is the nature of policing and security in the state. It's next to impossible to even enter there without either the security establishment stopping a journalist or even the non-state actors coming and issuing threats. So all this put together, and anybody who briefly Googles my name will see that I'm not new to conflict reporting. And despite that, all these things were present, And then started the actual reporting. The actual reporting was nothing very complicated other than the fact that, of course, we had to ensure a lot of privacy and a lot of how do I say it? Safety, of course, literal safety in terms of these women needed to be in a safe space, and I don't mean the metaphorical safe space, literally a safe space where they could speak about whatever had happened. That was difficult organizing. The third, of course, was the several of these women, and if you read the report, you'll see the details uh, are not nice, uh, not things that a woman would want to even speak aloud. It takes not just courage; it takes a lot of torture to have gone through that to actually come to a point where a woman is willing to come out and say, "This is all. These are the things they did to me when I was just a little child. These are the things that happened to me. This is how my society did not listen to me. This is how I had no recourse to justice, and so on and so forth." Even during the conversation, I was wary that are these plants? Is someone trying to manipulate a story into existence? Is someone trying to, politically maneuver the conversation in some direction? And I went back and forth with these women several times, questioning their. Say they told me a story that went from point A to B and then B to C, and I would again go back after point D saying, "Tell me again about A," just because I myself was very uncertain. And by the end of it, honestly, it was very difficult to pen it down. One doesn't simply, at least I do not simply write gore and gory stuff for attracting eyes. And there was no way to write this story by being euphemistic. Those every line you've heard. I mean, those who have read the report and seen the video. The women are saying things that are really moving. It's violent. It's not just emotionally, it's physically violent. So it was quite an ordeal to go through that. The last and very important difficulty was not mine. It was of these very women who were telling the story. Almost one third of the people I interviewed came for the interview and then said, no, I can't do this. I can't tell the story. This is too much. Uh, I'm ashamed to say it. I'm scared to say it. I'm worried if anybody recognizes me from my voice. And you'll see the video, all of their faces are covered. And I said, but what if somebody recognizes my voice? I'll face massive retribution after this. Thankfully, there were a lot of women in my crew, and they sat down and they told the ladies that, look, uh, we're not here to force you to say anything. And in fact, those parts are not there in the video where every interview I started by saying that, uh, please only say that which you can say. Please only say that which you want to tell the world. I'm not here to sensationalize your story. I'll walk back without a story if that be it, but only say what you will. And I was very aware of the circumstances these women come from, the social circumstances, I mean, these are not some very powerful women with a lot of political, social clout or whatever. These are very everyday women with children and with the joint families, not just their husbands and so on and so forth. I'll do a story. Great. I'll get some pats on my back. These women have to go back and live their lives. So overall, this was nothing short of a harrowing experience for me. And again, I'm not someone who's new to conflict. I'm not someone who's new to terrible stories of everyday people falling prey to terrible circumstances. But this was a particularly difficult story. The last part that I want to talk about before we move forward is some of what I was worried about the story has absolutely come true. The moment I went into the story, I remember a very dear friend of mine, and I confided in him saying, there's a story which is about a bunch of Kashmiri women who've been raped and tortured. I mean, it's just sex slavery by another name in Kashmir. And once this comes out, it's going to be a political minefield for me. And he was laughing. He was only half joking when he said, "Yeah, after this, you're going to be called the right winger, Sanghi, and so on and so forth." And that actually happened. That and I'm not coming to this point just from like a personal perspective. I really don't care. My previous story, there was the right wing was telling me to go to Pakistan. Next story, the Americans might tell me something. I don't care. The point here was that though this story went damn good viral on social media, it's been shared around. Just if you Google the phrase, you'll see it's been carried everywhere. There's not a single mainstream Indian news channel, not a single American mainstream channel, not European. Nobody has picked it up. And this is dastardly. You know why it is so dastardly? Is because you can another point to mention here. Just yesterday, when you put out the tweet about this talk is going to happen, yesterday, day before yesterday, whenever you did, one of my very good friends from Delhi, she texted and said that, I don't distrust the fact that you will tell an honest story, but are you going to talk about the Kashmiri Muslim women as well? I said, have you actually read the report? Every single woman I've spoken to is a Kashmiri Muslim. I'm not here to play Hindu Muslim politics. I wasn't going in for that. I'm not interested in that. But the point of it is that our mainstream news, has become so partisan that just reading a headline or a blurb and you've decided whether you want to attach yourself to the story or you do not want to. So I think that's what I have to tell about the report thus far. I mean, over to Aarti and you guys.
Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks very much for those perspective that you provided regarding the story. There are a few questions, but we will take it at the end of the session after the three speakers have spoken. If any participant has a question to ask, please put it down in the chat box. I'll be more than happy to take it up and post it to the respective speakers that you name, about the question. Now I leave the floor to Aarti to make a presentation. Aarti.
Thank you, Vipindra. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to speak on your platform. I'm going to start with how I, as a young journalist, went back to Kashmir. I was just 22-year-old woman, and I had no idea what had happened in Kashmir between 1990 to 2002. On the ground. I mean, of course, I read newspaper reports, but going back was a huge discovery. It was a very intense experience, and as a woman, I thought that my first point of contact obviously would be women in Kashmir. But before I get to that story, I really want to congratulate Siddharth for doing a tremendous job for actually bringing out the story which had been buried under a lot of propaganda. And also, it was almost, there was a willful omerta on this particular issue, which not just the propagandists of the other side were trying to hide, but there was a system within India which was either casual or willfully complicit, willfully a participant in creating this omerta and perpetuating this omerta. Now, going back to my story, that when I went back to Kashmir, and I've spent almost over 2 decades on the field in Kashmir, and I was at that time the only displaced Kashmiri Pandit woman journalist in Kashmir, trying to build a network, make friends, make sources. And invariably, what I discovered, while interacting with people was that when they spoke in public, especially on issues like, rape of women or sexual harassment of women, there was almost a code, a public code, and all of them would tell you that the only oppressor, the only rapist in Kashmir was the Indian army. That was the narrative that was being peddled publicly. And the moment you got out of that public situation, you went to a nearby cafe or you spoke to a woman in private, the story altered completely. And the story, in fact, was so horrendous that often I would not believe it. I had difficulty processing what was really happening in Kashmir at that point of time, because most of these women usually talked about three things: incest within the families, sexual exploitation within the families. Second, the kind of stories that Siddharth actually brought out, that how terrorists, especially foreign terrorists, came to Kashmir, how they started demanding sexual favors from women, from young girls, even minors, and also how apart from these two things, the third one was that general rape, rape as something which is universal, which happens in every society. So these three particular categories were often discussed in private conversations. And I want to tell your audience today that in the last 35 years, forget what media wrote, forget what the international press wrote, what Indian national press wrote, or what local newspapers or media wrote. You will not see any official data compiled by anybody in Jammu and Kashmir which tells you specifically that these are the number of rapes committed in Kashmir or in Jammu. I think it was after 23 years that this information was revealed in 2013 or somewhere around that time in the state legislative assembly. And I want to quote that data for your audience today to get a perspective that what kind of situation women faced and why there was such selective omerta on certain issues. I'm just going to read out some of the data which I have compiled. So since 1989 till 2013 or 2012, there were 5,125 rape cases registered in Jammu and Kashmir. The government registered 2,601 cases in Kashmir and 2,524 rape cases in Jammu. I will not even go into the molestation cases. The number is much higher. And that number, in fact, is so stark. Uh, in fact, I should mention that there were 14,953 molestation cases, out of which 12,215 molestation cases were registered in Kashmir, and only 2,738 were registered in Jammu province. Now you may dismiss most of this data, saying that women in India don't go to police stations, they don't register complaints of sexual abuse and harassment, but that story is across India. That is not something special to J&K. So leave that aside. The cases against security forces of rape, 70 rape cases were registered against security forces, out of which 41 were registered in Kashmir and 29 in Jammu. Police had 59 rape cases against them, out of which 15 in Kashmir and 44 in Jammu. Why am I mentioning this data? Is because there is no way you can tell out of these 12,000, over 12,000 molestation cases, how many of them were terrorists, how many of them were Islamists, how many of them were, separatists. And there is no way you can tell out of the 2,601 rape cases in these 23, 24 years, uh, whether who were the rapists. We can't really tell. But we know that 70 rape cases were registered against security forces. But what was the narrative? The narrative for 35 years has been, peddled mostly by Angana Chatterjees of the world, who are known, accomplices and supporters of Pakistani separatists and Pakistani ISI. And the fact that this narrative was also being supported, helped by the Kashmiri local media and also by the national media. Forget just the international media. Siddharth was talking about you get labeled, you will get called right winger, left winger, whatever. But the fact is that the true story about rape remained buried under a propaganda for which there was a well-oiled machinery which was working day and night. Now, let me give you 3 examples of that propaganda. First example, when I started, working as a journalist in Kashmir, you remember there was a major sex scandal which was published, given a lot of publicity by, it was broken by a local journalist and carried out in a national newspaper. It became a big story. And later on, some years later, I think 5 officials, including a former DG of BSF, was convicted in that case. And if I remember correctly, the woman, the pimp, so-called pimp, who was involved in the case, in the sex scandal, her house was burned down in Kashmir by separatists, by all the champions of women's rights in Kashmir. But you would wonder that if there are so many champions and so many women's rights activists in Kashmir, why did no one ever write about or ask about the women who were raped by terrorists, who were raped by separatists and Islamists, who were raped by the men within their own families? Why have we not seen any such stories in any national press, in any international press? We haven't. The second example was the alleged rape and murder case in Shopia in 2009. It triggered massive protests in Kashmir. There was so much violence over it. And at the end of the day, we got to know that there was a doctor who fudged the sample, the vaginal swabs, and she fudged it using her own vaginal swab. I mean, that is the extent of propaganda that has happened in Kashmir over rape. I remember Angana Chatterjee saying this in a conference in the US, that rape is a weapon being used by the Indian Army. Whereas the fact is that in the last 35 years or so, there are not more than, and I'm including Jammu, which is very different from Kashmir, Jammu, which does not have the same level or same kind of terror activity as Kashmir has seen. In all these years, we won't have more than 70 or let's say even 100 cases of rapes filed against the security forces. But the narrative was against them rather than the real story of rape. The number of rapes that terrorists have committed, that Islamists and separatists have committed, has never come out, and it will never come out because there was an omerta. It was set in by not just the separatists, by the system also, because I want really to underline this fact that the government made no effort to compile this data. The government, made no effort to do a survey of rape and molestation and sexual harassment in Kashmir. None, zero. I have been to weddings and to social gatherings in Kashmir where women have told me such horrendous stories that I can't even. In fact, I always found it very difficult to report on these issues because there was no way I could substantiate it with evidence. Because in public, the same women would refuse to even talk about it. In private, they may have confided many things in me, but I was not able to report because there was so much fear psychosis imposed by this entire cabal. Then the fact is that in all these years, nobody from the government or media industry actually tried to reach out to women the way Siddharth did. And I think he is really fortunate that women confided in him, women showed trust in him. That itself is an achievement. But at the same time, I would say that, all these Pulitzer winning journalists in Kashmir, not one of them who claim to have the trust of the society in Kashmir, who claim to have, the inside information of that society. None of them have dared to write anything. None of them have taken any pictures or any videos of these women who were subjected to rape by terrorists and separatists. Third episode I wanted to mention was Handwara. In 2016, the the girl who was allegedly molested by a soldier, and then there was massive violence. I can tell you that if you remember, she gave a recording. She gave a testimony to police, but so much pressure was created by activists like Parvez Khurram and company, that woman, that girl had to retract her testimony. She had to basically go and hide herself. Her entire family had to hide herself because there was so much pressure from the separatists and terrorists backed by Pakistan and their Western alliances that she just shut up. So the issue really is that this whole idea that Indian army or Indian security forces or the Indian state is using rape as a weapon against women in Kashmir, this has been nothing but actually a propaganda weapon. It has actually been a weapon of war used by Pakistan against India and also against those Kashmiri Muslim women who they claim that they are their own. So I'm going to end my presentation at this point, and I'll take questions during the session.
Thank you, Arati. We'll just now move on to Sunanda. Sunanda, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. This is one has done numerous discussions and debates about Kashmir, and even for someone like me, this has been an immensely moving conversation. Not just because I don't know about this, but because this is probably the first time we are talking about this in public. At the outset, I would like to really thank Siddhartha from the bottom of my heart for what he has done and the service that he has done, service for the truth, which really journalism should be all about. So therefore, I'm just so delighted that Law Alliance is also having this conversation, because when I read Siddhartha's report, I was almost what he said, that no one picked it up. I immediately knew that he has stepped in a minefield and no one is going to, I knew it. for the simple reason because I have been tracking. I'm also a part of Kashmir's story. I mean, being a Kashmiri Hindu myself, I've gone through this. I'm also a stakeholder, so to speak, but I have also studied Kashmir as a student and I write about it. So I know the kind of cottage industry that has built around, all conflict zones eventually become cottage industries. And then there are so many pulls and pushes and so much politics that goes on that it is impossible to speak the truth. When Siddhartha was talking about that he really went back forth, about this, that was the story even true? Um, I doubt any journalist in Kashmir today, and there are honorable exceptions, but I doubt anybody goes through that kind of rigmarole or anybody goes through that kind of homework because everyone has been sucked into this, you know, industry of terror. Having said that, I am out of all these stories that I read Siddhartha's report so many times, and I was reminded of the time because I left Kashmir when I was a young girl, and then as an adult, as I went into political writing and analysis and all that, I started talking about Kashmiri Hindu women who had been Pandits, who had been overall, who had been raped and terrorized, and all the sexual terrorism, I call it, had been done against them. And remember when I had lost touch with a lot of my Muslim friends in Kashmir when I had left Kashmir. When I started talking about it, and my name started getting out as someone who talks about Kashmiri Pandit issues and who writes about Kashmir on social media, I was approached by a lot of women, Kashmiri Muslim women, who are my friends, who we have known, who I had known as a child. And because we speak I speak the language, I speak Kashmiri. And over the period of our conversation, when we picked up from where, from the past where we had known each other, they would often in whispers talk about what they have seen, what they have gone through, and each one of them had a story to tell. And these women were women with agency. These were women who had actually who came from privileged backgrounds, and yet they were not able to talk about it. And I asked them, and these were all so-called, English-speaking women who had access to social media and everything. And I was like, would you like me to talk about it? And they were like, no, because obviously, because I'm a Kashmiri Pandit woman myself, so there are a lot of trappings about it. It immediately gets politicized. And I said, why do you not talk about it? And there would be complete hushed silence. There'd be, no, we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it. And without anyone going on record, there was no way for me to talk about it. Even though I knew about it, I was talking to my friends and to my fellow colleagues and journalists about it. No one was speaking about it. No one was talking about it. We didn't have the kind of access. So I did the next best thing. I started to understand, what is this psyche? What is this that prevents these otherwise women who have agency and who talk about most things? What is it that prevents them from talking about this? And this is what I would like to talk about, because Siddhartha and Arti have talked a lot about on what they have seen on the ground, and I would really like to back it up with what I think leads to it. What is the cause for this? When we talk about Kashmir, we talk about most aspects of terror, except one, which I call sexual terrorism. It is terrorism because unless sexual abuse by Islamist terrorists isn't seen as a form of warfare forced on hapless victims, we will not be able to confront it. My sense also is that because we relegate rape and sexual abuse, even during in conflict zones, we relegate it to women's studies or gender studies and something women study on thing, or it's not, it doesn't, it's the hardware of terrorism, it or it's something considered as a collateral damage of terrorism. So therefore it hasn't received mainstream and, more importantly, bipartisan attention that it should have received. While there is some reporting on what Islamist jihadists have done to women in ISIS controlled areas, for example, there is zero reporting on what has happened to women of Kashmir and how this so-called holy war has treated them. Kashmir, as I have always said in my writing, is the longest running jihadist laboratory of the world. While the jihad really is 700 years old, and there have been cases of sexual abuse throughout Kashmiri Pandit women and Kashmiri Pandits who steadily became a minority. For the purpose of this discussion, let me just focus on this modern jihad that really started in 1989-90. But before that, I must also quickly point out that as soon as India became independent in 1947, Pakistan invaded Kashmir, which most of you must be known, and it's in popular terms, it's known as tribal invasion, which should ideally be known as First War of Kashmir. Even then, the words used for non-state actors or terrorists who had come from tribal areas, the Lashkars or Mujahideens that had come from tribal areas and were backed by Pakistan military, they committed unspoken atrocities on women, mostly Hindu, but also Christian women who used to work in convent and Christian schools in a place called Baramulla in Kashmir. By most accounts, and I'm using this word very, very carefully, by most accounts, the genocide perpetrated in Muzaffarabad and Baramulla in those days, in October of 1947, that could qualify as a genocide. The invading tribal groups had absolutely no regard for anyone. They ran a riot, they left chaos behind them. But most of all, they raped women, nuns who were performing duties in St. Joseph's Hospital and schools, paramedics, nurses tending to sick and incapacitated. Nobody was scared. Nobody was spared. So these tribesmen who were actually fighting a holy war and who had actually wanted to be liberators for Kashmir and who had come there as a religious obligation of jihad to avenge the death of Muslims, in reality, they were not carrying out any religious war or jihad. They were brazenly trampling upon sovereignty of Jammu and Kashmir and raping and dishonoring women. So I want to let you know that rape as a political weapon has been used right from 1947. And this even Kashmiri Muslims will acknowledge, because when 1947 tribal invasion or first war of Kashmir happened, even Muslims were so terrified by what these tribesmen had done that for the longest time they did not ever talk about wanting to go with Pakistan, or sort of they did not want, they may have talked about independent Kashmir, but they were so horrified what Pakistan had done, or these Pakistani led tribesmen had done, that for the longest time they would not talk about Kashmir, sort of becoming Pakistan for a while, or they would talk about independence though. So this sexual terrorism is not new in Kashmir. Also, using as a rape as a tool of jihad is also not new. Hindu women were subjected to this torture in 1989 in the ethnic cleansing. So we know the names of Girija Tikku, Sarla Bhatt, Babli Raina. And we also know that women have been worse sufferers in Kashmir terrorism foisted by Islamists. And I also want to, the reason I talk about this sexual terrorism and why it should be looked at in a larger scale is also one of the earliest slogans given by Islamists in Kashmir. Remember, they were fighting a quote unquote a religious war, but one of the chilling slogans, they gave many chilling slogans, which could be political or which could be understood in political terms. But one of the chilling slogans they gave was, ऐसे कैसे, and I'm saying in Kashmiri and I will translate it in English, ऐसे कैसे Kashmir butter rosti button insan. We want Kashmir with Hindu women, but without their men. So this was purely a sexually terrorizing slogan. I don't understand that if this was a war for self-determination, or if this was a holy war, why this sexual slogan needed to be announced from the mosques of Kashmir. It is because of this slogan, and I know because I was there, it's because of this slogan that a chill ran through the spines of Kashmiris, and they left everything and they said, we are going to move, because they also had memories of 1947. So they knew what was in store for them. They did not think, and a lot of people always say that how did this exodus happen and why did this exodus happen? It was because of these kind of terrifying and explicitly sexually abusive slogans that were made. So sexual terrorism is nothing new. And however, what is not known to most people was that Kashmiri Muslims, once Kashmiri Pandits became minorities, and then finally the 1989 Exodus and Exodus with that, the final list of that step of that genocide when everybody left. Now, who was left? There were only Kashmiri Muslim women left. So once that ethnic cleansing was achieved, jihadis turned focus to Muslim women, especially in rural areas, and those who did not have, for lack of a better word, social status or privilege, or poor women, basically. And the Muslim society, in the tight grip of fundamentalist establishment, where conforming to fundamentalist dictate is enforced. So this sexual violence, the sexual violence perpetrated by Muslims upon Muslims, remained an internal issue and remains an internal issue, and is discouraged to come out in public way. Because how do you talk about being sexually abused by mujahideens who profess to be morally superior to you because they have committed themselves to jihad? So there is that dichotomy. We also have to understand how many women Muslims around the world have treated jihad in Kashmir, and women also, because Siddhartha's report talks about Duktrane Millat, one of those women-led movements. Those women-led movements were also responsible. It's not just the men and it's the patriarchal system and all that. We also have to pay attention to the fact that these women-led movements also perpetrated this whole silence, this enforced the unwritten and unspoken code of silence, because these organizations like Duktrane Millat, they urged women to dedicate their bodies to the Mujahideen who were fighting holy wars. They wanted them to become proud wives and mothers. Asia Andrabi, who still leads Duktrane Millat, and if you read her, and I have read her, whatever she has spoken in public, I have read it extensively. She pleads for a strict separation of gender roles in jihad. So she says that fighting jihad is a man's job. Woman's task is to take care of the family. And she says the reason for this is simple. If women also fight in jihad, then who is going to raise the children? She stresses that women should not participate in military operations, as this will cause some kind of social instability. On the contrary, women should encourage their men to join jihad, and they should offer them moral support so men can carry out their tasks. So when we say, when she or organizations like her say moral support, we all know what that moral support has meant in last 30 years and the kind of burden it has placed on Muslim women uh, to stay silent. And while I study jihad and how it operates, I have asked myself often that why is it that post Al Qaeda and ISIS and all these are all alphabet soups. Doesn't matter whether you say ISIS or Al Qaeda or Hizbul Mujahideen in Kashmir or LET. I have often wondered that why are leadership positions, if women are to take part in the jihad, but why are leadership positions exclusively given to men, and why are frontline positions only given to men? So clearly, jihad as a warfare has decided what women will be, and women will be sexual slaves. So therefore, when a society is like Kashmir was picked up to be um, jihadist laboratory where jihad was going to be played out, the great games, and we won't go into the geopolitical, that's not the topic of this discussion. But when it was picked up after Russian withdrawal from then USSR, after it was picked up as the next ground or next playground for jihad, then it was clear that what this kind of warfare is going to bring to Kashmir. And it also was incumbent on women to stay quiet, because now not only are you shaming your family, according to the morality keepers like Trane Miller, you are also now letting down this so-called holy war. So the shame is twofold. And then you could also be accused, which a lot of my friends often told me, that you could also be accused of playing into the hands of Indian narrative and then shamed and ostracized further, and said that, you've spoken, why do we not just deal with it at a family level? Do you not understand who you are strengthening, what voices you are strengthening? This is what Siddhartha also came across, when you talk about this, and that happens in Kashmir all the time. So my sense here has been, in all my research that I have done, is that unless we understand how jihad operates, we will really not be able to confront this. We have to understand that rape and sexual slavery, even though they may not say it publicly, but those are that is the warfare. That is the part of the warfare. That is the role the women are supposed to play. And it is heartbreaking that a lot of women, they just cannot speak about it. And kudos to these women who have spoken to Siddhartha, even though I speak the same language, and I'm sure Siddhartha had the language barrier, and yet he was able to talk to them. I kudos to him, congratulations to him, that he was able to bring us these stories, because I was not able to penetrate that, even though I knew the language. So my sense here is, and I want to end it with this, is that it is important that we, the whole so-called civilized world, confronts the reality of jihad and what it does, and brings it in open. Because and we don't do that, otherwise Siddhartha's report would have been everywhere, from New York Times to Washington Post to Times of India. And why not? Because anything about Kashmir, if someone sneezes in Kashmir, in a New York Times newsroom, there's a flood. We know that. And if this report didn't make it to any of the newspapers in global liberal media or Indian media, not even any media that I saw, then we know that we are not willing to talk about jihad as a form of warfare and what it does, not just to minorities, but also to women, Muslim women. And Aarti has gone in detail about the only narrative of rape that has existed in Kashmir, which is the rape by,
Just one more minute,
security
please.
force. Army. I will just speak about that in 30 seconds, and I'm sure it will come up in questions. That Indian Army is not a mercenary force. Indian Army is a very disciplined force. So if there have been, I mean, this is not my job to say that there haven't been individual transgressions. I'm sure there have been individual transgressions. But Kashmir has gone out, Kashmiris have gone out on streets, and they have come out in thousands to protest about that, and rightly so. Nobody can take away the right to protest. So it's not that rape has not been politicized in Kashmir. Rape has been talked about in Kashmir. Rape has been, there must be at least 500. You can Google Kunan Poshpura. The case is sub judice. I will not talk about it, but you can. It's in Supreme Court right now. You can Google Kunan Poshpara, and you will see at least 1,000 columns. You will see books that are written about Kunan Poshpara. You will see the number of discussions that have been held about Kunan Poshpara across the world. But is jihadi rape that has been perpetrated on Muslims has not been talked about. And that is the real issue here. Individual transgressions by anyone, including Indian Army, if there are any, are tackled. There are methods, there are platforms to tackle them. But how does one tackle a rape that is almost on, is a sort of warfare, is used as a weapon by jihadists? With that, I'll end. Thank you so much, and I'll wait for question answers.
Thank you, Sunanda. Before we take on, there are a few questions that have come out. Before we take on the questions, I just want to show what Siddhartha Roy has actually done, the report itself, for you to read. Yeah, Siddh, you want to say
Guys,
something?
everybody, my name is Siddharth. It's just spelled funny, and any complaints about the spelling have to be directed to my father. I'm not.
That is fine.
It's Siddharth. It's
Yes,
Siddharth.
Siddh. Siddh,
Okay, I
Siddh.
was wondering, and thank you for correcting that, because it
Yeah,
sounded
even I was
a little
wondering
odd in my
actually.
mouth.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you.
It
Thank
sounds
you for
strange.
correcting.
Sorry.
Siddh is better. I prefer to call you Siddh. Yeah, okay. So let's just see what Siddh has done, his work. Sunanda has already had an opportunity to see that. So for all the other people who are here out here, okay, just a second. Okay, so this is what Siddh's work is all about. So this was published by the Diplomat. So though Siddh works for Zanga News, it is actually saying Zanga News contribution. Rape and Silence, Kashmir's Jihad. You can all just Google it and then take a look at it. Yes, it has been co-authored by Ojaswin Katuria and Sayan Ghosh. It was published in February, but we wanted to organize this event a little earlier than this. But because of certain scheduling issues, we could not do it. But I'm so glad that we did it today, and we are highlighting this issue and the report, which, as Siddh mentioned earlier, no mainstream media around the world has they have not touched it. So they have not even touched it with the Baj poll. That is a shocking development that we see. So this is what he has written. I think I will allow you to Google it and take a look at it and then read it. So this much I wanted to show before we proceed. One particular thing that I wanted to highlight in this report was the incidents. I think I'll leave it to you to read, but there was one important thing that I wanted to mention, the cry of a women victim there. She asks, is this jihad or is this petty? It's with a note of anger entering the monotone of despair. I really was touched by this particular line from Siddharth's report. I'll leave it here. I request all of you to just go Google it and then read it. So we'll take a few questions now, but Sid, the first question is directed at you. It comes from me. After you reported this in February, of course, you said the media hasn't touched it. What about others? What about the state law enforcement agencies in India?
Yeah, that in fact is a point which all the so here's to put it very firstly, let's do full disclosure. Saying is that even though what I mean by mainstream media not touching it is obviously the big names and the TV channels and so on and so forth. Social media has done more than justice to this story because the number of emails, the number of messages, and so on and so on that have come to me, especially from Kashmir, from inside Kashmir, is unlike many reports that I've done in the past. Uh, sorry, you were sorry. I'm very forgetful. Too many points. What did you ask again?
My question was, what about the state law enforcement
What about the
agencies?
state authorities? Right.
How
So
did they
one of the
react to this
points here,
report? Did they? Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things that happened, as I was saying, the moment this report came out, uh, people started saying that I'm this pro-government voice or something, a pro-Indian government, and this is a novelty in my life. Like people have accused me of a lot of things in my life, but nobody's ever accused me of being pro-BJP or pro-Indian government. I mean, this is a novelty. Uh, uh, in fact, when I had written that tweet of mine which said this contains some uncomfortable truths, I wasn't merely talking about Kashmiris jihadists. I was also talking about the Indian government. That how is it that you did not create a structure of governance and of policing and of social justice where these women could safely come and seek protection from the state? That did not exist. Point one. That still does not. I understand the exigencies of being in Kashmir. It's not, Kashmir is not just another state. It's quite literally a war front. So you cannot have the same policing law and order structure. But nevertheless, how is it that there weren't you did not involve NGOs and you did not involve whatever secondary tertiary structure? So of course there's an indictment of the Indian state there that you did not give this. The second more obvious point, and I will not hold back any punches. I tweeted and reached out incessantly to the Indian Foreign Services people to highlight this at the UN Human Rights Commission meetings, which incidentally happened right after the report came out. Go to my Twitter list and see me requesting the Indian mission to take this up. Let me give you an example. Uh, Germany picked up the issue of the Yazidi women, right? After they were given shelter there. They took the women to different platforms to narrate their story. They took like effort after effort. The Europeans took effort after effort to highlight the story. I couldn't move a single person in the Indian Foreign Services to even take note of this. How
That
is it
you're
that you
not the
don't care
only
about?
one.
Thank you. Now I can also tell you, like through a source, I know this through a source in the Indian establishment. I know that the report reached the highest of ministers in this country. Everybody knows about it. I can understand that, like what Aarti and Sananda were saying, and we have an idea that there might be a bias in international news commentary. But what about the Indian one? If you really did care about these women, how is it that you haven't opened up an investigation into this report as yet? How is it that so many women on camera speaking about it without edits is out there and nothing has been done? So I'm sorry that nothing has been done from the Indian government. And lastly, I'll tell you, not in my voice, but in the voice of these very women. I asked these women that there were women, like there was one lady who was over 60 years old. Her story, like it was very difficult for me to end that interview because she was crying like a little girl. Um, I'm sorry, but it was a story from her childhood, and she hasn't forgotten that. And I asked her, I remember, why are you telling this story today after so many years? What do you hope to achieve? Do you want justice? Do you want the government to come in and do something? And she said point blank, you can never get me justice for what has happened. I just want this crime to be acknowledged. And the tragedy is that the law enforcement agency or whatever government is, a yada yada you have, they haven't even acknowledged this issue. Not a single minister of this country has come forth and said, okay, I read the report that's come out. Can we do something? So, no, nobody has done anything.
Right. Aarti, are you there? Are you able to join back?
Yes, I can speak. I'm in a moving
Okay,
car, so
right. That is fine. If
but
you're able to speak,
yeah,
that is
yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say that Siddharth, you're not the only one. This has been my experience as a journalist on the ground for last 22 years. That the government of India in the spiral of silence with respect to the women who were subjected to rape and sexual abuse in Kashmir, because, as I said, there is no official data, there is no official acknowledgement that terrorists have raped women. And you see, the fact is that you don't actually need to do much. If you just go around, if anyone goes around in Kashmir and talks to women in private, they will tell you women in Kashmir culturally are very open. They don't, they're not shy of talking about these issues on one-to-one basis. But there has been no effort whatsoever. And the biggest tragedy is, as I said, the complicity of both the central government as well as the national media. I have no expectations from international media. If you read their reports, if you read reports of New York Times in 1930s or 1940s, if you read the English press in the 1930s and 40s, they have the typical Oriental approach to India. They are guilty of the white supremacy, and looking at the eastern parts of the world with that lens. And but I have expectation from the national press. I have expectation from my own fraternity, which trained me to go deep into such issues and bring out stories of injustice. But in Kashmir, the parameters were completely opposite. The parameters that applied in other states of the country did not apply in Kashmir, as if there was willfully, um, uh, the, as Sunanda said, the jihadi project, as if there was a willful jihadi project in Kashmir. And a certain section
As if
of the Indian system, a certain section of the Indian system was a participant, was a partner in crime. So I am not surprised that the embassy didn't respond to you, or the foreign affairs ministry did not respond to you. I have no expectation from them, because for the last 32 years this is what they've been doing. They have not ever talked about the atrocities committed by terrorists in Kashmir. How many times have we ever seen a documentary on the victims of terrorism in Kashmir? How many times? Zero times. We have no movie whatsoever on that. There was one movie, apart from I think, fortunately, after 32 years, Kashmir Files brought out the ethnic cleansing, the genocide that we Kashmiri Saraswat Brahmins were subjected to Kashmir. But apart from that, we have nothing. We have Basharat Peer wrote a book, and there was a movie that was based on that book. But that movie, once again, projected the Indian state and the Indian army as culpable for all the crimes that have been committed in Kashmir. We have no movie, we have no documentary whatsoever showing the horrors that Kashmiri Muslims were subjected to by jihadists, by Islamists, and by Pakistan-backed terrorists. So, on that note, I'm going to pass it on back to you, Vipindra.
Thank you, Arti. Sunanda, there is a question from one of the audience. He wants to understand why there are Kashmiri Muslim women who still kind of talk in favor of all these jihadi elements, ISI as Taliban and such other outfits. That is a question that has come. Will you be able to take it up?
Taliban?
You're on mute. Yeah.
I'm trying to understand the question is that even after Kashmiri Muslim women know the horrors of jihad or what it has done to Muslim women, why do they still support separatism and terrorism? Or is that what the question is?
Yeah, I think that is the question. Yes.
Okay. So I think I don't think we really understand or we really, so there are two sets of women here. And in my initial presentation, I made it clear. One is this Duktrane Millat and Asiya Andrabi and that kind of, they are complicit in this. They are jihadis themselves by, just because they don't pick the guns. And they have, Asiya Andrabi, as I've told you, I have quoted her saying that she thinks that this is her job in jihad to be a mujahideen wife or to raise jihadis. So they are part of the jihadi project. There can be no expectation from them. We can have no expectation from them. Ordinary Muslim women can have no expectation from so-called women organizations like Duktrane Millat. So all these women who actually choked up and spoke to Siddharth, they at some point, forget if Indian state is hostile, they could have gone to women's organizations that exist in Kashmir, that talk about them, that are run by Muslim women. Why did they not go to them? Because these Muslim organizations, Muslim women organizations, are also a part of the jihad project. So we cannot expect that. And so the outspoken ones would be that. The other women are scared of, for the same reason. It's you are shaming the society now. If you have shaming your family, there is this inherent amount of shame that now you have said, you've talked about these morally superior men who are mujahideen, and you've talked about them in those terms. So you have brought shame not just to the family, but you've also brought shame to the holy war. You have to understand how it is, how jihad is explained to children in Kashmir, how they are raised on this diet of jihad, that it's holy war and everyone has to partake in it. Everybody has to be participant to it. Why do the then same women go out on roads and talk about any kind of injustice that has done by Indian army? Because that is also part of jihadi project. To speak against Indian army, to speak against Indian state is also a jihadi project. To not speak against mujahideen led terror is also a jihadi project. So Kashmir, as I said, is it's a dystopia. Kashmir at the moment is a dystopia. That there is no other way to describe it. Everyone, Hunger Games, everyone is part of this dystopian project. Everyone is doing something. It is only once in a while, few remarkable women will come up in public and they talk to Siddharth, and that's why it breaks my heart, because their voices should have been amplified. It is not, it took them 30 years to speak. If their voices are not amplified as they should be, maybe the next generation, it will take another 50 years for next set of women to come up, because what is the point? So unless we also amplify these few brave women who have come up, what is the incentive? Unless Indian government sets up something, what is the incentive? Unless human rights organizations talk about them, what is the incentive for these women who have actually suffered? So that's the thing.
Thank you, Sunanda. Thank you. We'll take one last question, but this question is for all three of the panelists today. Aarti goes first, then Siddharth can go next, and Sunanda, you can make the closing remarks after that. This question is this: what needs to be done in this particular situation? The issue has been highlighted already by Sid in his report, but what is the next step? What is the solution? What can be done, by all the various stakeholders currently who are seized of this issue, or at least who need to be seized of this issue? What can be done? Aarti, would you like to take on this first? And Siddharth can go second. And
Yeah. Yeah, Bipindra, we have a National Crimes Bureau which compiles data, right? And I feel the starting point is, of course, uh, women who are victims of rape in Kashmir, whether they are getting raped by terrorists, by separatists, Islamists, jihadis, I mean, they are one and the same thing, all of them. Uh, or by uh, by men in their extended families, or by strangers. There has to be a proper registration, there has to be proper compilation of this data, because unless and until you really look at the data, you would never get the entire picture. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, that the ratio of rapes uh, between the ones committed by the security forces and by men, we don't know who they are. I mean, it's like I haven't done the I haven't done the exact. I don't remember the exact ratio, but the difference between the number of rapes committed by the general category of men and security forces, there is huge difference. But the narrative, as I said earlier, was against the Indian army. So until and unless you look at the numbers, you will not get the complete picture. You will never be able to present the right perspective, right picture before your viewers, your readers, and general public. Second, of course, is that, see, rape, as I said, it's a universal crime. It's been committed the has the highest rapes across the world. That itself is a separate story. That itself, rape itself, is a separate issue. But when we say that there should be, there should be official, there should be state response to rape, we have to have mechanisms, we have to have institutions, we have to have a justice delivery system uh, in Kashmir as well with regard to this crime. And I think even though state is handling the general crime of rape as it is dealing with it in the rest of the country, it's going through proper channels, police, and then courts. But with respect to rapes of women, perpetrated by terrorists, we have to have a different approach to it. We have to have a different mechanism and a different institution for it. Uh, only because the propagandists in Kashmir have turned the reality upside down. The fact that it's the terrorists, it's the Islamists and jihadis who have brutalized women in Kashmir the most, that needs to be brought out, so that this society, which has been almost kept as a hostage by these Islamists, they get to know the reality. It is for the greater good of Kashmiri Muslim society that we have a separate mechanism and a separate institution to deal with this. And then, of course, we should also have non-profit organizations. We should have uh, organizations which look at this particular category from a different lens, because all other women rights groups in Kashmir in the last 32 years have been looking at only one category of rapes, and that is rapes committed by allegedly by security forces in Kashmir. So we have to have a separate institution, separate mechanism, but the state has to take that initiative. You can't leave it to just non-profit organizations, because as we've seen in the last 32 years, uh, human rights, women's rights, and all these rights groups in Kashmir are essentially controlled
by Pakistan and their allies. Thanks.
Thank you, Aarti. Sid, what are your comments on this?
Uh, I have a request though. There are two questions in the chat box which I would like to address after I answered this part. Okay, so what can be done? You know, to be very honest, I'm the wrong person to ask this question to. I'm a journalist. I'm not a policymaker, and I don't masquerade as one. I know it's that's what most people do on primetime TV, but I do not masquerade myself as a policy expert. Second of all, I did not even approach this. What do I report on? I specialize on conflict journalism. This story, I actually shouldn't be the one doing it altogether. It should have been done by maybe someone who's actually more sensitized, more better handled to do a story of this sort. So my first answer would be that take everything that I propose as a solution with a massive, not a pinch, like a whole bowl of salt, because I don't know enough, and I'm very happy to admit that. Having said that, I think the very beginning of solving this sort of a situation is to first acknowledge it. If there is no acknowledgement in public discourse about this, uh, I think we've already lost any hope of actually ever solving such a scenario. Point one. Point two is that I do think that while agreeing to Aarti saying that there should be a structure of grievance, etc., and rape in itself is a massive issue in the subcontinent. Uh, Having said that, I think it will be very difficult to implement things in Kashmir because, again, Kashmir is not just another state of this country. Kashmir is a very special case because of its history, its contemporary politics. It's literally a civil war zone. So it's not going to be easy. The only thing, the only positive thing that I would say about this is that actually in the process of when doing this story, I did speak to a lot of Kashmiri women who wanted to help these people. And there are people, there's the mention of one person there. I don't vouch for her work or her organization, but at least she said the right things that they are trying to rehabilitate these sorts of people. The reason she didn't want to go all out and speak is because she was afraid of her own, for her family and herself. So maybe the government should put in a place where they secure and provide enough funds, expertise, etc., to handle cases of this sort. Lastly, uh, the whole, the problem with this, the way the story was seen was that there has to be either the Indian side has done a rape or the Pakistani side has done a rape or something like that. Everybody wanted a black and white kind of a story. This is not a story of X side of men to committing crimes on women, X side of the war or Y side of the war. The fact is that it is the whole damn war that's going on that is abusive to these women there. So I'm sorry that to make apple pie from scratch, you have to start with the universe. So you will have to address the fact that they are in the middle of an ongoing civil war to even begin addressing that. And the other point that I want to go back to is something that Sananda briefly touched upon. This will be my last point in this, is that rape as a weapon is massively used in all forms of war. It's been there since forever. I mean, the oldest of crusades and Roman conquests and conquistadors and everything, we see that. I mean, the conquistadors, for example, they love to speak about how dirty the South American people were, but they had no problem going and raping the South American women. That time they weren't dirty. So this outright hypocrisy has always existed. But here is the thing about Kashmir, or any conflict zone for that matter, is that, we are so attuned, and I say this as a journalist of conflict, that we are so attuned to the big crimes, bomb phat gaya, hijack ho gaya, that our whole sensibilities and our sensitivities are completely, waiting for that big blast of a story. we have become completely desensitized to the story of that woman who got raped on the way to get vegetables from the market. There isn't any glory. There isn't any headline in that. In fact, forget rape, forget rape. I'm actually going to be continuing this investigation. And one of the things I want to really talk about later when the story develops is the everyday difficulty of existing in Kashmiri society. Think of that woman who has to, go just buy vegetables in the market and the market is shut days on end. She can't do her business. She can't buy stuff. She can't send us kids to school. And in all likelihood, she bears all the burden. So to when you ask me this question, to put it, TLDR version, how do you address it? A, I don't know. B, it's a big, huge task. C, start by at least acknowledging that this exists.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Sunanda. You want to talk about the solution part? Yeah.
Yeah. Kashmiri society as a whole, because I have seen it, I have known it, I have studied it, I have lived in it, has become radicalized and has become radicalized more and more. And women have been the worst sufferers. You see 5-year-olds going to school in a hijab now. I lived in Kashmir for first 12, 13 years of my life. I have never seen young girls wearing hijab in Kashmir. Kashmir wasn't, even for Muslims, was an open society for a long time. Even burqas were worn by older women who were going to mosques or something, covering of the head and all that. This did not exist in Kashmiri society. And now when I see little 5-year-olds wearing hijabs and going to school and all that, you can see how the society has changed, with total ethnic cleansing, with hardly any minorities being there. The society also is not coming in contact with any non-Muslim, so to speak, on a day-to-day basis. So the society also has radicalized and changed a lot. So that is something that we have to keep in mind. And those de-radicalization programs might need to be started, but we're not even anywhere close to it at the moment. What we can do really, and that is really something for, I don't have much hope in the governments, I don't have much hope in NGOs, but like-minded people in academia, in maybe in the world of journalism. What we can at least do is we can make sure that rape, when it is done as part of terrorism, it is studied as mainstream terrorism. Because when so-called big boys of terrorism, big boys, the scholars of terrorism, study terrorism, what do they study about terrorism? What do they study about Islamist terrorism? They will talk about the big guys and the territory that has been taken. They will talk about the number of bomb blasts that have been done. They will talk about the kind of weapons they use. So, all those big boy male things, in that thing. So a woman's story gets relegated. It is a collateral damage. It is something that can be dealt with later. What is, when we are dealing with, when the house is on fire, we're not going to talk about, any little thing that is, a little in their minds. We're not going to talk about a small candle burning because the house is on fire. Now we're not going to take. So we have to change that mindset, that rape, when it is used as a weapon of war, is not a candle burning. It is actually part of the house that is getting burnt. And unless you solve that, this is 50% of the women, of the population, you're not going to be able to handle, you're not going to be able to confront any kind of terrorism. So I think it is incumbent on us that, we as scholars of terrorism, as students of who study terrorism, who talk about terrorism, we also, in our writings, in our talks, in our interventions, make sure that we talk about this as a weapon of war and don't relegate it to something that will be talked about when everything is fine. Then we will talk about this. It's not so. That is something that we can do. Other than that, I think I mean, I'm really going to end this on a bleak note. It is hard. I do not want to. I'm a victim myself, and it I will never place the burden of bringing out the truth on victims, because I have seen that all my life. I have been told that you have not spoken. For example, Kashmiri Pandits are often told that, where were you when this was happening? You were not telling your stories when we were telling our stories, but we were not getting heard. That is a different story. So I will never ever place the burden of proof on the women. But what we can do, as sensitive people, as not just journalists, not just academia, not just commentators, but as sensitive people, we can insist that whenever terrorism is talked about, we also talk about people who use women's bodies as a booty in the war. It is not to be used. Women's organizations, feminist organizations that have been hijacked by partisan this thing, they need to come out of it. And even if even if it is a minority of one, we need to speak. And that's all I can. We need to. I'm not surprised that no foreign officer spoke to Siddharth or this thing, for the same reason that they don't think it is something that they need to handle now. They think it is something बाद में देखा जाएगा. We'll take care of it later. So we need to talk about it more. And hopefully, women who are not completely taken in by the Dukhrane Millat narrative, they will find some kind of, hope that our voice is being, we do have some allies somewhere outside of Kashmir, and maybe then they will open up. So that's all I can say at the moment.
Thank you, Sunanda. We have covered most of the questions, but there are a couple of small questions that, I mean, not small. There are a couple of questions that not taking up today. If you wanted to answer them, but what I'll do is I'll send them across to Sid. You can write a mail. We'll send across to the participant.
No,
The
there's
response
one question that I would like to really address while we are in
Right,
the
fine.
session, which has
Fine,
been asked. Yeah, which has been asked by someone with the name Pimi.
Please,
She asks that that why is it that there's not a single Kashmiri Muslim woman on the panel speaking? I'll address it in this way. Firstly, I'm not the organizer, so Bipindra, you can answer that better.
Yeah, probably I'll answer that question. Sid, is it okay?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Okay. Just to make it clear to everybody who's here, we attempted 2 Kashmiri women to come and speak in this event. Both of them refused. I don't want to take their names right now, but if anybody individually approaches me, I can give you the names of the 2 women who refused to join, or one of them did not even respond to the invite that we sent, though they had seen the message. So I think that makes it clear, right?
Yeah, I think I'll also put this out that I am anybody listening, Kashmiri Muslim, non-Muslim, whatever, atheist, whatever you are, you really want to talk about this, or organize a thing. I even sent out a tweet saying those who were on Twitter abusing me and saying there's a fake story or Indian story, come on, guys, just join the call. Ask me, grill me over it. So no, Pimi, at least from my side, like I would have loved it to be. Okay, now that we are here, I need to really mention this. Do you know that I wasn't going to do the story originally? I actually gave it to a woman journalist in Delhi who has reported quite a bit in Kashmir. I met her over dinner and I handed over my intelligence to her, like handed it over to her. Because I said, I think I shouldn't be doing it. She refused. I couldn't find a journalist to do the story. That should answer the whole, apprehension that I somehow.
Yeah, Sid, I think you've made it clear. Let me also make it clear, Law and Society Alliance is a non-partisan organization. We are not doing it, for the sake of, this black and white thing that people do. It's not that. It's a real serious issue. It is as serious as the Kashmiri Hindus who have been persecuted, who have been genocide has been committed against them. This is as serious as that. So we'll take up any issue that is as serious as that. And Law and Society Alliance will continue to highlight this. We are not scared or afraid of anybody. And I just don't want to mention it, but since we are talking about this, I want to mention Sid for writing this report has got a life threat on him. Yet he is here openly coming and talking to us today. And this has been an open thing. Everybody, we have sent, whoever has asked for the password for this event, we have sent it to them. We have not discriminated against anybody, for whatever political or religious or whatever belief that they have, we have not discriminated against it. Let me make it very clear. And I think with that note, we'll end this session. I just want to end this session with just two important, dedications that I want to make. One is to the victims of the current cloudburst in Amarnath Yatra. People have died there. We want to, pay our homage and honor to them. And also to former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. He has been a great friend of India. We also want to pay our respects to the departed soul, and we pray for his Sadgati. With that, we'll end this. We'll come back again. We want to do events as often as possible, every Saturday, possibly, or at least twice or thrice in a month. So we'll come back with another event, with another debate of this sort. Again, I thank Aarti Tikku for spending her time. She's actually catching a flight very soon. She must have reached the airport by now. I want to thank her. Despite her travel, she agreed to be on this panel. I want to thank Sunanda, who joined so early in the morning at 7 a.m. from Colorado, sparing time for this issue. And I want to especially thank Siddharth Roy for being here today, for the good work that he has done by highlighting an issue that nobody wanted to talk about, which everybody wanted to brush under the carpet. He came out openly and talked about it today. I thank him for that. And I really appreciate and hats off to him for the journalism that he's doing. And I want him to continue to do the kind of journalism that he's doing right now. With that, I thank everybody, all the participants. Without them, this program is not possible. I thank all of them for joining, and also to the people who asked questions. I have not taken the names this time, but anyway, I thank all of them for the questions that they posed today. With that, we end the session. Thank you so much. We are already short of the time. I wish all of you to enjoy your day, people to enjoy their mornings in US, and the night in Delhi, and the afternoons and evenings in Europe. Thank you so much. See you then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.